Jane Unchained, Talk Live with Will Lowry, an attorney for Animal Outlook. They are fighting a plan by the Trump administration to increase the pig slaughter lines. We can barely show you any of the images. They are absolutely so horrific, but we will show you a glimpse just so that you can see exactly how terrible the situation is. It's really disgusting. And now with the coronavirus hitting the pig slaughterhouses that are destined or scheduled, I should say, to move into this high-speed slaughter, it, according to Animal Outlook, poses an even greater danger to the public. Will Lowry, you're the lead attorney for Animal Outlook on this case. Tell us why you feel this is something every consumer needs to know about.
Well, Jane, first of all, I'd like to thank you for continuing to shine a light on this issue. Obviously, this is an issue that not just Animal Outlook, but a number of different animal protection groups take very seriously. We have joined a lawsuit with 6 other animal protection groups that has been filed by the Animal Law Clinic at Lewis and Clark, challenging this rule. And this rule in general, people might hear a number of animal groups challenging the rule and think that this is just an animal issue. I think what is so egregious about this rule in general is that there are multiple layers of issues that deal with this. So while we have expressed concerns in our lawsuit regarding humane handling issues, animal issues, and environmental issues, there are also workers' rights issues that have been addressed via a separate lawsuit. There are significant food safety issues that have been addressed in a third lawsuit as well as ours. And we even just recently, to sort of amplify the egregiousness of this issue, a USDA inspector just came out and filed an affidavit speaking to problems with the new rule, problems with pig slaughter and high-speed slaughter. So it's just layer after layer after layer of issues. And we are specifically challenging some of the animal and environmental issue along with food safety, but this is not just an animal group issue. This is an issue that affects the American public as a whole, whether they care about food safety, worker safety, environmental issues, or animal issues. There's sort of a different flavor that everybody can rally against this rule for.
Well, absolutely, because it's really, really horrifying. I'm going to remove the banner for 1 second and hide this banner so we could really show you the extent of the horror here. And so there is a pig. You know, these animals have the intelligence of toddler humans. And this is no way to treat any animal. It's disrespectful. It's obscene. There they are being dragged with hooks, okay? Hooks, dragged to the slaughter. Now, this is a new rule that they're going to institute in these slaughterhouses. You see the blood gushing out of this pig's neck. These workers are going to have to kill these pigs even faster than they normally would. Even faster than they normally would. And even in the best of circumstances, some of these pig slaughterhouses are being shut down because they're being overrun by coronavirus, the largest coronavirus cluster in the United States of America, and therefore the world, since we're the epicenter of the virus, our nation. The epicenter is at a pig slaughterhouse in South Dakota. And my understanding is that's the very same pig slaughterhouse that is scheduled to increase the slaughter speeds. So what does that do in terms of health and safety, in your opinion?
Well, I just want to be clear, even before the coronavirus, there were significant issues. And exactly like you said, Jane, I mean, even pre-coronavirus, pre-rule, things were still inhumane for pigs at these slaughterhouses. So it's not like this rule is suddenly everything was great and now it's terrible. It's just one layer on top of another. And so you mentioned the coronavirus, you know, obviously that has an impact. I am not a scientist. I'm not one to correlate, you know, exactly the cause of that, those types of things. But, you know, I will say, I think it amplifies some of the conditions in these slaughterhouses. It amplifies some of the worker issues. I mean, you've seen across the country in multiple slaughterhouses, multiple pork slaughterhouses and others being shut down, dozens and hundreds of workers becoming sick. And so if you start to think about the conditions for the workers and then think about how those conditions translate to the animals, It's just one layer of suffering after another.
Now, what's interesting is that the companies have issued statements, and I'm going to read a statement, for example, from Smithfield, which is the location that has this very large coronavirus outbreak. Smithfield Foods in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which processed pork, I just say pigs because that's who they are, as pigs, closed, has 3,700 employees. 644 coronavirus cases have been connected to that plant, more than half of all the cases in the state of South Dakota. And according to this Business Insider report, at least one 64-year-old man died. So right there, that is a cause for concern. And I want to read what Smithfield said about that. Again, we're talking about this because Smithfield, that very plant where the coronavirus outbreak is the largest cluster in the United States, is scheduled to adopt this high-speed slaughter rule unless people stand up and say, this is beyond obscene. This will not stand. This is not what a civilized society does or how it treats other beings. But Smithfield is invited on any time, and I'd like to read the statement that Smithfield Foods has issued, saying many things, but it says that they're going to do rigorous deep cleaning and sanitization, install additional physical barriers to further enhance social distancing, and they also talk about employers' pay. It says here, Sioux Falls plant supplies nearly 130 million servings of food per week, or about 18 million servings per day to our country. Our more than 40,000 U.S. team members, thousands of American family farmers, and our many other supply chain partners are a crucial part of our nation's response to COVID-19, said Kenneth M. Sullivan, President and Chief Executive Officer for Smithfield. Now, he says, as an industry and a nation, it is imperative that we continue to operate because, essentially, he says, our government has identified agriculture and food production as critical to the response to COVID-19. They have emphasized over and over again our special responsibility to maintain operations and normal work schedules. They have been explicit. Shelter-in-place orders do not apply to us. The reason is obvious. Food is essential for survival and civil society. Now, Kenneth M. Sullivan, President and CEO of Smithfield, is invited on any time, but I would like to challenge that as a representative of 3,000 union workers who work at another slaughterhouse owned by another ginormous company said, people can stop eating animals. It's not worth risking the lives of people going in there for exposure to COVID-19. And so my basic challenge to this is that this is essential. Would you care to discuss whether or not killing animals is essential to our survival, or is it indeed the problem? This is believed to have started in a wet market slaughterhouse in China. And so we need to address the root cause in order to find the solution. If killing animals is the problem, why would killing animals, more animals, be the solution? Would it not be to shut down the slaughterhouses and for all of us to transition to a plant-based diet that's better for us, that would have a tendency to prevent other zoonotic diseases, which are diseases that jump from animals to humans, and would also improve the health of Americans? We know that the factors for getting the risk factors for coronavirus are obesity, heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, which are often food related.
Yeah, from our perspective, Jane, I mean, you're going to get no disagreement here. I mean, a big part of Animal Outlook's mission, or our sole mission, to clarify even before coronavirus, was to change the world for animals. And so we would certainly argue with the point that it is essential to slaughter animals to survive. And so the fact that we continue to slaughter animals in this day and age that we live in, where plant-based alternatives are both humane and healthy as well as abundant, it doesn't seem to make sense. And that, again, is why organizations like ours exist. And that's part of the reason that we invest so much effort trying to do investigations to show the American public what happens. And so in addition to the health benefits that you spoke about, a lot of our efforts are related to exposing some of the inhumane horrors that happen behind these slaughterhouses. And so from our perspective, wholehearted agreement that it is not essential to eat animals. And I think, that sort of statement that eating animals is essential, is front and center now, with people dying, with this virus spreading all over the place, and businesses being declared essential. I think it certainly raises the argument that what truly is essential. And like you said, there are so many alternatives, and not only are those alternatives healthy, they are much more humane, and that's a big part of our effort. So you'll get no argument from this end to try to justify slaughter as essential.
By the way, these images are not from Smithfield. These are images from an undercover investigation that Animal Outlook did, showing high-speed slaughter. High-speed slaughter, to my understanding, has not started at Smithfield. What has happened there at the South Dakota plant is the COVID-19 massive outbreak that's the largest cluster. Your argument is that you shouldn't add high-speed slaughter onto it. Is that correct? What exactly is your argument, and what are you doing about that?
Yeah, our argument is that there should not be high-speed slaughter. And from a legal perspective, we've made a number of arguments to try to rescind the high-speed slaughter rule that was passed last December. And so the argument is essentially threefold. First and foremost, we believe that the agency, the United States Department of Agriculture, did not take into account all the appropriate facts when they passed this rule. There are food safety concerns, there are humane handling concerns that it's our position and in our complaint that these concerns were dismissed and that they were glossed over. Some of these concerns are actually reiterated in an Office of the Inspector General report from last year as well. And so it's not just us saying these things. Additionally, there are environmental concerns, and part of our argument is that the USDA did not take into account environmental concerns. Obviously, if you are speeding up slaughter, that means more pig slaughter, that means more pollutants that are running into the environment from these plants. And so from a legal perspective, our concerns are essentially that they did not take into account food safety concerns, humane handling concerns, or even remotely consider environmental concerns. And because the USDA did not do these things, the plaintiffs, including Animal Outlook and all the other groups, we have had to expend additional efforts to try to counter this rule. We have had to do more as far as educating the public, as far as communications, alerts, petitions, those types of things. Even on the investigation front, we have undertaken efforts to try to counter this rule because, in short, we do not believe that the USDA followed the appropriate processes, and they did not follow the appropriate laws of this country, such as the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, in passing this rule. So that's the basis of our lawsuit, and we are hopeful that the rule will be struck down.
And again, the connection is that the slaughterhouses throughout the United States are being hit with coronavirus. I interviewed a union worker at a plant in Colorado who represents approximately 3,000 workers. She told me that 3 had died. This was a week ago, and that there were many who were ill. And now we have, at least as of this weekend, the largest cluster of coronavirus cases in the United States at a pig slaughter plant in South Dakota. So what's next?
Yeah, I mean, what's next, hopefully for us, is that we'll have a successful lawsuit. I mean, if I put on my optimistic hat, it's our hope that the court evaluates the lawsuit and considers the merits and decides to strike down the rule. I would note that pig slaughter is not the only area where the USDA is deregulating. There's already an additional process for chicken slaughter that's very similar, and there's a similar lawsuit in that space. And there are some rumblings that the same will happen with cattle slaughter as well. And so what's next, I think, is one by one, we tackle these issues. Our hope, not just Animal Outlook's hope, but all the other excellent animal protection groups that are part of that suit, our hope is that we can get this rule struck down and that we will continue to challenge these rules. I think from the American public's perspective, I think to the point you made earlier, the root solution to all of this is simply stop eating meat. And so if people didn't eat meat, there would not be high-speed slaughter processes, and we would not be having this discussion, coronavirus or not. And so in the interim, people can make individual decisions. I think they can also share information. They can contribute to the groups that are fighting these cases, including Animal Outlook and others, by going to websites such as ours and others and making donations. Especially in our case, it's very important that we continue our investigations work. And so the short answer of what's next is I hope we get a victory here, but I have no illusions that the USDA will suddenly stop trying to deregulate the slaughter process. And so we, along with the other groups, will continue fighting step by step.
So again, there is in the introduction to this video a petition that you can sign. And last I checked, I'm trying to see how many people had signed it, but quite a few. So you can go to the petition, which is right on the introduction to this interview, and you can make your voice heard and speak for these voiceless animals. And so that is something right there that you can do in 2 seconds flat. We have it right on the intro. You can just click on that and sign it. You can also donate to Animal Outlook, formerly Compassion Over Killing, animaloutlook.org/donate. They do undercover investigations, and they have lawyers like Will Lowry who fight tooth and nail to speak for these voiceless animals. You know, this is a juncture now where we are basically in isolation. Many of us feel, you know, put upon. We're here. It's very hard to go out, to do anything. Our suffering pales in comparison to what these animals experience on the best days, much less on days when they're being slaughtered at high speed. So that's one of the reasons why we could take an opportunity to reflect and say, do I really need to participate in that? If I feel that I love animals, I may have a dog or a cat at home, would I want my dog or cat to be treated in that manner? And also as consumers, you can ask yourself, do I want to subsidize that? Do I want to co-sign that hit? Do I want to contribute to that? Or is this an opportunity for me to look at the total sum? The fact that most experts believe, conspiracy theories notwithstanding, it started in a slaughterhouse, wet market, meat market. It's different words for the same thing, a place where animals are stressed out, tortured, and killed for food. Okay? And do I want to, and then it's come full circle now with the virus itself hitting workers at slaughterhouses all across the country. And now we have this additional element of, wow, our administration, our government is suggesting that we need to kill them even faster. What is, by the way, while we're talking about that, the impact of that? Because according to your press release, it says here that that would increase fecal contamination and diseased pigs being allowed for human consumption, toenails, hair, and abscesses allowed into meat, and even more animal mistreatment. This, according to a new sworn statement by a federal slaughterhouse inspector who was involved in looking at a test case not involving Smithfield, which has not yet instituted the high-speed slaughter. So once again, these images are not from Smithfield. These images are from another facility that was the test case for high-speed slaughter. Go ahead. Let's get into the nitty-gritty about how you believe it may impact the food supply.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as the high-speed slaughter rule, I think some of the estimates are that every year there might be up to 11.5 million more animals or pigs slaughtered through that process. And so, that's 11.5 million more animals that are subjected to this suffering. And as far as the food supply and from a food safety angle, I think you touched on it. And so one of the things that's worth highlighting is that an actual USDA food safety inspector at a plant that was one of the test plants for the high-speed rule has filed a declaration that was part of our lawsuit. And so essentially this inspector is a brave whistleblower that came out through the Government Accountability Project and submitted a declaration with their findings, their understandings, and their personal experiences from sitting at one of these slaughter plants. And just like you mentioned, Jane, there's a lot of horrifying things in that declaration. I mean, there's discussion of people in the plant trying to sneak animals past them that are not fit for human consumption. There's discussion in there about inhumane handling type activities, some of the same stuff that we saw during our investigation. I think the inspector actually comes out and flatly says that she would not eat food from the plant where she worked at. And so I would just ask people to pause for a second and consider that. I mean, if you have a USDA inspector that is essentially saying that they would not eat food from the plant where they work because of what they have seen with the high-speed slaughter, I think that needs to trickle down to the average consumer. There's discussion in there about toenails and hair getting into the food supply. And so very, very important information. And this is not something, and I know a lot of people will try to dismiss the animal groups as bleeding hearts, but this is an actual USDA inspector that spent over 25 years in that plant saying these things. And so it only justifies what we've been saying. It only validates the information that's depicted in our investigation. And I think people need to stop and digest that information for a bit and consider the source of their food. And then again, to your earlier point, maybe some alternate decisions they can make that are not only more healthy and humane, but perhaps better for food safety as well.
And once again, we invite anybody from the slaughterhouse or the meat industry on anytime. In fact, we would love to dialogue with them. I have read portions of a statement from one slaughterhouse, and I want to suggest one thing. Chris says Smithfield is owned by China. So is that your understanding? Smithfield is a Chinese-owned company, is it not?
I don't know. I believe so. I don't want to say without being sure.
It is. I'll answer the question.
There you go.
Yeah. So the other thing that's sort of confusing to people is that they're saying, well, this is all for America and America and America, but the company itself is owned by China. And then one of the other big, in fact, the biggest meat processor in the entire world is a Brazilian-owned company.
Right.
So that's interesting. When I spoke to the union worker for the other plant that's been hit badly by coronavirus, and many of them have, but this one was one in Colorado, that's owned by a Brazilian. So they have a U.S. subsidiary, but it's a Brazilian-owned company. So that's another thing to take into account.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean, the South Dakota plant is not an isolated incident. I think it's not hard for people to Google and see that the pork industry is being hit pretty hard by the coronavirus. I know you mentioned Colorado. There's been incidents in Minnesota as well as Iowa, so it's most definitely not an isolated incident. I think people might benefit from looking at our investigation video online. And so aside from watching some of the humane handling issues, people can see the close proximity that these workers are within and see, how close people are on top of each other. And that only amplifies some of the other concerns brought up in one of the separate lawsuit against the high line speeds, which is worker safety. And so obviously, as you run pigs through slaughter faster and faster and faster, it's not just the animal issues. There are worker safety issues as well. If you can try to imagine yourself in the close confines of one of these plants, trying to hang an animal, slaughter an animal with sharp devices and those types of things, it only highlights how many different layers of bad there are around this rule in general. And we're at a point now where we've got multiple lawsuits. We've got an actual inspector saying the rule is bad. You've got numerous groups speaking out against this. You've got the coronavirus. Even before coronavirus, there was concerns with African swine fever getting into the system, as has already happened in Asia. And so it's just layer after layer of bad. And I think it behooves people to inform themselves and speak out against this.
Well, I want to, this is a very complicated subject, and I know you've delved into the legal aspect very, very deeply. Will Lowry of Animal Outlook, thank you so very much. And once again, we invite any representative from any slaughterhouse or any meat industry representative on Jane Unchained anytime. We would love to dialogue further. We did read the statement of one of the slaughterhouses. If you want to try to stop high-speed slaughter, there is a petition link associated with this video. You can click on it and sign. Thank you so much, Animal Outlook, and Will Lowry, for all you do.
Thanks for covering it, Jane. We really appreciate it. Take care.
Talk soon.